So when I say, as the subtitle of my book, that I think religion poisons everything, I'm not just doing what publishers like and coming up with a provocative subtitle. I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity. It says we can't be moral without Big Brother, without a totalitarian permission. It means we can't be good to one another. It means we can't think without this. We must be afraid. We must also be forced to love someone who we fear. The essence of sadomasochism. The essence of abjection. The essence of the master-slave relationship. And that knows that death is coming and can't wait to bring it on. I say this is evil.
One of the great turning points in the development of civilizations was agriculture, was settling down to cultivate grains and to look after plants, which involved no longer traveling around with the herds, but settling down. And out of that came urbanization. Out of urbanization came all the arts of writing and education and the rest, which have been very constitutive of the development of civilization. And so it's tremendously interesting to look at the contrast between agriculture as a kind of an applied science or an applied technology as against religious explanations and religious technologies by means of taboo and prayer and sacrifice. If you think about our agricultural ancestors who found out about rotation of crops and about letting the soil lie fallow and about fertilizing the soil and about irrigating it and about breeding strains of grain that were resistant to disease, eventually the discovery of pesticides. Now, all these things came out of direct empirical experience, trial and error, effort, observation, and reason, very distinctive of the intelligence of human beings in solving problems that life posed to them. Now, if you tried sprinkling holy water instead of irrigating, or if you tried prayer instead of fertilizing, or if you tried broadcasting the seed just any old way without thinking about the soils and about letting the soils breathe and so on, you would have much less success. In fact, you would have no better success than chance, and probably less, if you tried something purely on the basis of religion. I mean, to caricature the difference, it's a bit like this. Try lighting your house by prayer instead of by electricity, and you see which one works. So the strands of thinking, the one that developed ultimately into an organized, disciplined way of inquiring into natural phenomena, and which we now call science, is very different from the other, which is trying to make sense of the world in terms of traditions, of revelations, of teachings by people who take on themselves the role of prophet or teacher, and the sort of technologies they offer, the technologies of obedience and prayer and sacrifice and the rest.
Mr. Hitchens, why would scientific discoveries about the origin of the universe obviate the existence of God?
Well, they don't in and of themselves, but I just would submit, I really will be quick this time, and I know I've been a little verbose up till now. The likelihood that what Edwin Hubble saw through that telescope, the red light escaping at speeds that none of us here are capable of really imagining, towards the ultimate expansion and collapse of the universe and the heat death of the whole thing, that all that happened so we could be sitting here is, to me, in the very, very highest degree, improbable. That a process of evolution by natural selection just on our own tiny little planet, which in its own tiny little solar system is the only one on which life can be supported. Everywhere else, just in our little system, all the other rocks are either much too hot or much too cold to support life, as is much of our planet, which we know has for a long time been, not recently either, on a climatic knife edge, and which is still cooling. Only one. And on this planet, 99.8% of every species that ever evolved died out. This is an extraordinary way, I think, to make sure that Homo sapiens comes to Georgetown. It is only the most extraordinarily self-centered species could imagine that all this was going on for our sake. That's why I don't like people saying that their religious faith is modest or humble. It's the reverse. It's unbelievably solipsistic. And that's why you get people apparently abject, much too abject for my taste, like Mother Teresa. Oh, I'm so humble I can hardly bother to feed myself, but out of my way because I'm on a mission for God. No. This is arrogance, as a matter of fact, and it claims to know what it cannot know. I could say that Einstein was right when he said, the miracle is of the natural order. The miracle is there are no miracles. Understand this paradox. The natural order doesn't interrupt itself. The sun doesn't stand still at midday. God doesn't catch a child as the kid falls out of a window, or heal lepers randomly. And none of that ever happens. The miracle is there's a force that holds it all together that's consistent and unvarying. That's wonderful. Okay, he may show there's a mind somewhere in the universe, but to say we know what that mind is, to move from the deist position to the theist one, we know what God wants us to eat or not eat. We know in what positions he wants us to make love or with whom. We know his instructions on it, is an unbelievable piece of conceit. And in my opinion, it's the reason why I may be a very poor spokesman for my side of this argument, but I think anyone who thinks about it has to vote that given the amount of uncertainty that we have, and given how much we now know, how much more we know about how little we know, the definition of education and our civilization, the only people who have to lose in this argument are those who say they do know, and who claim, yes, I do know what God wants, I do think he sent a son, I do think there was a resurrection, I do think there's salvation, claiming to know things they cannot conceivably know. I mean, to put it in a mild way, if Dr. McGrath has such extraordinary sources of information as the ones he's claimed to have available to him, I can't understand why he's only occupying a chair at Oxford University.
Well,
you should be, with the knowledge you've got, you should be a real mensch. And I'm afraid you don't know any more than I do about whether there was ever a Jesus of Nazareth, a resurrection, a miracle, a virgin birth, or anything. You couldn't know any more than I do. You can't. You just claim that you do. I'm afraid that means, I think, that you lose this round.
Well, if I could respond.
A neurologist friend of mine once told me that he had a patient come to see him who was a retired Don at university, in fact at Edinburgh University, and this patient said to him, I think I've had a stroke, and moreover I think I've had a stroke in the occipital lobe of my brain on the right-hand side. And my neurologist friend was very used to people self-diagnosing from the internet and coming up with all sorts of very peculiar complaints, and he said, well, why do you think that? And this retired academic said, because there are figures rising up out of the floor and floating up into the sky in my left visual field. It turned out when he had a scan that he had a minor stroke in the visual part of the visual center of the brain. And when the little blood clot had resolved after a couple of weeks, the angels that kept floating up out of the floor vanished. But the academic knew that they weren't angels. He knew that they were symptomatic of some cerebral accident, some minor brain damage. But if he had not been an academic, and if he had lived in another time in history or another place in the world today, he would have been having religious visions. And if one thinks about the accident in the past or in contemporary life of people getting overtired or having an epileptic fit or a fever or getting drunk or eating a magic mushroom, or all the different reasons why people might have encounters with the gods and then interpreted them as real eruptions into a different realm, and that they were somehow getting messages from elsewhere, maybe George W. Bush had these sorts of encounters on a regular basis, you could see how they would reinforce the sense that there is a reality that is being encountered. Now, science can address this. Science can look at these sorts of phenomena and very often find really rather good reasons why they occur.
Christopher, what is your explanation for the beginning of time, space, and matter out of nothing?
Well, we don't know. I remember being asked by one of my children, what was there at the Big Bang? And I said, well, you have to imagine, this shows how poverty-stricken our own vocabulary is, and I suspect how poverty-stricken our own capacity is. In other words, I think there are some things, not that we don't understand or know, but that we cannot. So we're reduced to sort of primitive images. But I said, suppose you could picture all of matter, the whole of matter, condensed into, I got this from Hawking, I think, one of his colleagues, condensed into something like a very small, dense black suitcase of the kind you see people carrying money in crime thrillers. And it's about to fly open. That's what you'd have to be able, and everything that's ever going to be is inside that. That was the best I could do, and I don't think many people could do, if I say it myself, that much better. But I was completely unhorsed because the kid said, well, what was outside the suitcase? And I thought, oh, well, I can't do that. And I don't know anyone who can. And that, in a way, would be my whole point. I don't have to know. You do. You're the one who says you know, not me. The theist and the deist say, oh, come on, we know. This is only possible with an author. It's only possible with a creator. It's only possible with a master and commander. It's only possible with a dictator. You're welcome. I don't need 5 minutes.
Again, how do you get something from nothing?
I am not the one who has to answer the question. Excuse me, you're the one who has to answer the question. You're the one who claims to know. You say there was a creation moment and a creator. I want to know why you're changing the subject and saying to me, how do I not know this? When you're the one who has all the information. I also want to know, I also want to know this. I want to know what sources you have that are not available to me. How do you know that an intervention will occur to prevent the entropy and implosion and destruction of our solar system?
If you want to go to our second debate, I'll provide that. Well, but what I'm saying is, let's say there's no intervention. Let's say there's no intervention. We go to heat death. Does that mean that the universe was not created and not designed?
It doesn't entail that belief, no, but it makes it.
Okay, so what's your point?
It makes it seem a very capricious designer. Shall we say, rather as I said, it's an old verse of Phil Greville's, created sick, commanded to be well. Why would people be told, okay, I can create you, but I'm going to create you with original sin, misery, shame, death of children, disease, and so on, just to see if you can pass a test that would mean I might not send you to hell? I don't say that that didn't happen. I say that I'm very glad that the evidence for it is very scanty. And I accuse those who do believe it, and I can't have been surely misunderstood on this point, of harboring a very sinister desire to live in a totalitarian system.
How do you define sinister?
Mr. Hitchens.
The desire to be a slave.
Is that
masochism?
I regard masochism. In your brain,
I regard masochism.
Is there something beyond you that?
I'll say that I think masochism is a sinister and creepy impulse. Yes.
Mr. Hitchens.
I quoted the example of a woman in America who wrote to me saying that when she was 7 years old, she was sexually abused by a priest in his car, and at the same time, a friend of hers, who also 7, who was Protestant, or was of Protestant family, I should say, died. And she was told that because her friend was Protestant, she had gone to hell and would be roasting in hell forever. And she told me that of those 2 abuses, she got over the physical abuse. It was yucky, but she got over it. But the mental abuse of being told about hell, she took years to get over. And
with respect, Richard, you're an empiricist, you're a rationalist. One letter from one woman in America isn't really the basis to extrapolate and make such a sweeping conclusion.
That is, of course, true. And I'm not basing it on that. It seems to me that telling children such that they really, really believe that people who sin are going to go to hell and roast forever, that your skin grows again when it peels off with burning. It seems to me to be intuitively entirely reasonable that that is a worse form of child abuse that will give more nightmares, that will give more genuine distress, because they really believe it. If they don't believe it, it's not a problem, of course.
Isn't it because religion answers all sorts of human needs and spiritual urges which science never can? Isn't that the real issue that you can't get away from?
Religion may answer human needs. I mean, for example, if you're terrified of dying, religion may answer the need for comfort and consolation. Or if you miss a loved one who's died and you hope to see them one day in heaven, then religion answers a need. It doesn't make it true.
One last thing, and then we'll go to the audience. What do you say to those people who say, you talk a great deal about the power of science, the truth of science. You have people like Sam Harris who say morality can be determined by science. You have quite charismatic, forceful people going around the world proselytizing on behalf of science, that science is actually the new religion that you guys are pitching.
I wouldn't say it's a new religion. I mean, it certainly does some of the things that religion traditionally has tried to do. like to answer the deep questions of existence, and it does that, and it does it successfully in a way that religion never has. But it isn't a religion because it's not based upon any holy books, it's not based upon faith, it's not based upon revelation, it's not based upon tradition, it's based upon evidence, and there's a huge difference.
And anything that we do not have evidence for that's not scientifically testable, you would dismiss?
Well, scientifically testable is putting the bar rather highly, but I do think that evidence is the only good reason to believe anything, yes.
So love, beauty, aesthetics, metaphysics?
No, I mean, those are obviously important questions, and if you ask some question like, how do you know that your wife loves you? It's from evidence. I mean, it's not scientifically testable evidence, but it's evidence. It's little looks in the eye, it's little catches in the voice. I mean, that is evidence. That's not just internal revelation.
And that leads us to ask some questions, really, about this alleged relationship, which seems to be connoted by the phrase religion and science. Because little reflection shows that science as a sort of corporate entity, itself very various, ranging from fundamental physics all the way to geology and meteorology and, lots of ologies, and religion, which is also an extremely various set of phenomena as well, that the relationship between them is by no means as simple or straightforward as the phrase seems to suggest. But we know one thing, that what is characteristic of scientific inquiry, the scientific mindset, if you like, which asks questions of nature and of human beings and of society in ways that can be tested, looks for the kind of evidence that could support conclusions drawn about nature and society and human beings, which is always open to refutation. It is intrinsically defeasible. It can be met by counter-evidence, and if you meet with strong counter-evidence, you either reformulate your hypothesis or you abandon it and look for an alternative. There's something about the scientific mindset which is always questing, always open to refutation, which is not made anxious by the fact that we don't have all the answers, but indeed is enthused by that fact to go and look for answers, or to try to formulate questions that admit of answers. Whereas what is characteristic of the religious mindset flows from the fact that we human beings are very eager for stories. We want an account, an explanation of things that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and which is explanatory and which is reassuring. And it's a very notable fact that whereas most religions can be explained, and the message of salvation, for example, associated with Christianity, can be explained very briefly, probably doesn't take as much as half an hour, it takes some years to get to grips with the basics of physics or the biological sciences. This is one reason why, of course, the religions are very attractive. It doesn't take so much thought, and also they convey those certainties that we're all very anxious to have. So there is no consistency between what is characteristic of the scientific mindset and what's characteristic of the religious mindset. Remember that in the major religions of Christianity and Islam, unquestioning faith and obedience to the tenets of the faith and to the ministers of the faith is regarded as a major virtue. And St. Paul said, the three virtues, hope, love, and faith, that faith was a very important one. When doubting Thomas wanted to have proof, he wanted to stick his finger into the wound, he was sort of told off because all the others had believed but they hadn't seen. And Søren Kierkegaard, makes it a great virtue that faith is sometimes something one commits oneself to in the very face of evidence, that one takes a leap into all the counter-arguments and embraces and accepts a certain kind of view. And this is very, very different indeed from science. Someone once very aptly said, where faith begins, science ends.
If there is no God, why do you spend your whole life trying to convince people that there isn't?
Well, it isn't my whole career, for one thing. It's become a major preoccupation of my life, though, in the last 8 or 9 years, especially since September 11, 2001, to try and help generate an opposition to theocracy and its depredations internationally. That is now probably my main political preoccupation. To help people in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Israel, resist those who sincerely want to encompass the destruction of civilization and sincerely believe they have God on their side in wanting to do so. Maybe I will take a few minutes just to say something that I find repulsive about especially monotheistic, messianic religion. With a large part of itself, it quite clearly wants us all to die. It wants this world to come to an end. You can tell the yearning for things to be over whenever you read any of its real texts or listen to any of its real, authentic spokesmen, not the sort of the pathetic apologists who sometimes masquerade for it. Those who talk, there was a famous spokesman for this in Virginia until recently, about the rapture. Say that those of us who have chosen rightly will be gathered to the arms of Jesus, leaving all of the rest of you behind. If we're in a car, it's your lookout. That car won't have a driver anymore. If we're a pilot, that's your lookout. That plane will crash. We will be with Jesus, and the rest of you can go straight to hell. The eschatological element that is inseparable from Christianity. If you don't believe that there is to be an apocalypse, there is going to be an end, a separation of the sheep and the goats, a condemnation, a final one, then you're not really a believer. And the contempt for the things of this world shows through all of them. It's well put in an old rhyme from an English exclusive brethren sect. Says that we are the pure and chosen few, and all the rest are damned. There's room enough in hell for you. We don't want heaven crammed. You can tell it when you see the extreme Muslims talk. They cannot wait. They cannot wait for death and destruction to overtake and overwhelm the world. They can't wait for what I would call, without ambiguity, a final solution. When you look at the Israeli settlers, paid for often by American tax dollars, deciding that if they can steal enough land from other people and get all the Jews into the promised land and all the non-Jews out of it, then finally the Jewish people will be worthy of the return of the Messiah. And there are Christians in this country who consider it their job to help this happen so that Armageddon can occur, so that the painful business of living as humans and studying civilization and trying to acquire learning and knowledge and health and medicine and to push back can all be scrapped, and the cult of death can take over. That, to me, is a hideous thing in eschatological terms, in end times.
Now, many of you might worry that the notion of well-being is truly undefined and seemingly perpetually open to be reconstrued. And so then how, therefore, can there be an objective notion of well-being? Well, consider by analogy the concept of physical health. I mean, the concept of physical health is undefined, as we just heard from Michael Spector. It has changed over the years. When this statue was carved, the average life expectancy was probably 30. It's now around 80 in the developed world. There may come a time when we meddle with our genomes in such a way that not being able to run a marathon at age 200 will be considered a profound disability. You know, people will send you donations when you're in that condition. Notice that the fact that the concept of health is open, genuinely open for revision, does not make it vacuous. Okay, the distinction between a healthy person and a dead one is about as clear and consequential as any we make in science. Now, another thing to notice is there may be many peaks on the moral landscape. There may be equivalent ways to thrive. Okay, there may be equivalent ways to organize a human society so as to maximize human flourishing. Now, why wouldn't this undermine an objective morality? Well, think of how we talk about food. I would never be tempted to argue to you that there must be one right food to eat. There's clearly a range of materials that constitute healthy food. But there's nevertheless a clear distinction between food and poison. Okay, the fact that there are many right answers to the question, what is food, does not tempt us to say that there are no truths to be known about human nutrition. Now, many people worry that a universal morality would require moral precepts that admit of no exceptions. So, for instance, if it's really wrong to lie, it must always be wrong to lie. And if you can find an exception, well, then there's no such thing as moral truth. Now, why would we think this? Consider, by analogy, the game of chess. Now, if you're going to play good chess, a principle like don't lose your queen is very good to follow. Okay, but it clearly admits of exceptions. I mean, there are moments where losing your queen is a brilliant thing to do. There are moments where it's the only good thing you can do. And yet, chess is a domain of perfect objectivity. The fact that there are exceptions here does not change that at all. Now, this brings us to the sorts of moves that people are apt to make in the moral sphere. Okay? Consider the great problem of women's bodies. What to do about them? Well, this is one thing you can do about them. You can cover them up. Now, it is the position, generally speaking, of our intellectual community that, while we might not like this, we might think of this as wrong in Boston or Palo Alto. Who are we to say that the proud denizens of an ancient culture are wrong to force their wives and daughters to live in cloth bags? I mean, who are we to say even that they're wrong to beat them with lengths of steel cable or throw battery acid in their faces if they decline the privilege of being smothered in this way? Okay, well, who are we not to say this? Who are we to pretend that we know so little about human well-being that we have to be non-judgmental about a practice like this?
One thing that one can say about them, and you have to remember that the apologists of religion are very keen to say, well, look, the natural and social sciences emerged from religion, just as they're very keen to say that our understanding of the rule of law and human rights emerged from religion. Great claims are made about Christianity, for example, as having had this influence in our Western tradition of being the originator of ideas of the equality of human beings and rights. One need only say that Christianity remained consistent for 1,800 years with slavery, the attitude that it took to women, the fact that it supported tremendous social hierarchies, in fact even had as part of its metaphysic the idea of the great chain of being from the worm to the deity, in which man was at the center, but man was higher than the other animals and higher than woman, of course, and that there was the hierarchy of angels and archangels, principalities and powers. So the idea of hierarchy, the idea of the divine right of kings, none of this seems to be very promising from the point of view of a human rights agenda about the equality of human beings. So how they can claim that is very difficult to say. But they also claim, that out of inquiry, debate, discussion in the church, in theology, came the kind of discussion and inquiry which gave rise to science. And so that makes one take a couple of steps back and ask whether it is really true that science emerged from religion. Well, now, there is a story to be told, and it's one referred to by Mr. Pataki, about the origins of religion in animism. It's one of our best understandings of the kind of outlook of our ancestors for many, many tens of thousands of years, many, many tens of thousands of years before the young religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam emerged just in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, at a time, by the way, when monarchical and hierarchical social structures gave us our model of a sort of kingly deity who issues commands. Now, it happens to be quite a separate matter that religion in our last 2,000 years, or perhaps slightly less, has in part addressed itself to the emotional needs of people. But it's a very unhistorical view to think that religion has always been about human emotions. In fact, it's rather distinctive of versions of Christianity that it preaches an individual relationship between a human being and the deity, such that you can have whispered conversations in bed at night and so on. Most religions in the past were not personal religions. Think about Roman religion. That was a public religion or set of religions. The empire embraced many different views, but what it wanted was public observance of the rites, of the celebrations, the feasts, for reasons of social cohesion. They didn't think that Jupiter and Juno and Mars and the other Roman gods were available for private confession or were interested in private prayer. What people had was the Lares and Penates, the gods of the spirits of the half, which were their own, sort of touch wood kind of tutelary deities that they could appeal to if things were going wrong or they were ill or needed a bit of luck. But that's a quite different thing from what is preached by in Christian moral psychology, which is about this possible personal relationship. It's, by the way, if you decide that you want a religion for purposes of relationship, then I should go for Catholicism, because there are loads of beings that you can relate to. It's not just Jesus and God, it's Mary, all the saints, and Saint Mary, the Australian one, and so on. So what one can say is that the origin of science and the origin of religion share a common ancestor. It's not that science emerges from religion, it's that they have a common ancestor. The same sort of point you make to creationists about monkeys. They say, human beings are not descended from monkeys. And you say, that's dead right, they're not. That monkeys and human beings have a common ancestor, and they diverged a long time ago. The common ancestor of religion and science is ignorance in the early... In the early phases of our ancestors' development, and science has been, with serious interruptions and inconveniences from its fellow descendant, has been having more success latterly than the religions did. You can regard the relationship between religion and science as they evolved separately from this common ancestor, somewhat like the relationship between Cro-Magnon man, which is us, and the Neanderthals, which is them.
The reasons for atheism, or as I would prefer to say anti-theism, are, I would say, as follows. The first and the simplest objection to religious belief is that its metaphysical claims are not true, in fact are false, and come from a period that I would describe as the infancy, or the fearful childhood of our species, when, because we have brains that seek for information and seek for explanation, brains that even now prefer a conspiracy theory to no theory at all, and are bound to do so, and indeed in some ways a right to seek in this way, explanations had to be found for things that seemed at the time inexplicable. And in the absence of crucial information, we didn't know, we had no way to know that the Earth went around the sun. Didn't know that there was a germ theory that would explain disease. Didn't have any means of knowing that earthquakes were the result of living on the crust of a cooling planet in a rather odd solar system where most of the planets are either too hot or too cold to support life, and our own is in large part too hot or too cold to support it either, and where the remainder lives on a climatic knife edge, and always has. Some design, by the way, and that's just of one solar system. We didn't know that matters of this kind, earthquakes, waves, disasters, were not punishments. It was quite possible to listen to those and even to believe those who thought that they could explain. But for these people, a double problem arises. There is first the difficulty of, if not the impossibility, of demonstrating the existence of any creator or designer at all. I think I say something uncontroversial when I say that no theologian has ever conclusively demonstrated that such a designer can or does or ever has existed. The most you can do, by way of the argument from design, is to infer him or her or it from an apparent harmony in the arrangements. And this was at a time when that was the very best that, so to speak, could be done. But religion goes a little further than this already rather impossible task and expects us to believe as follows: that the speaker not only can prove the existence of the said entity, but can claim to know this entity's mind. In fact, can claim to know it quite intimately, can claim to know his or her personal wishes, can in turn tell you what you may do in his name. A quite large arrogation of power, you will suddenly notice, is being granted to the speaker here. The speaker can tell you that he knows, he cannot tell you how, but he can tell you that he knows, for example, that heaven hates ham, that God doesn't want you to eat pork products. He can tell you that God has a very, very strong view about with whom you may have sexual relations. Indeed, how you may have sexual relations with others. He can indicate, perhaps a little less convincingly, but no less firmly, that there are certain books or courses of study that you might want to avoid or treat with great suspicion. Now, this suggests to me already a design. I think I can see a design shaping up here, and I think I can see who designed it and created it. I think it was man-made. I think the whole inference, because you can certainly see a design at work, is that this is human, that it was designed at a time of great distress and great ignorance, and that it had an enormous advantage, the design of which can be inferred from every one of its practices. It gives to people, ministers, priests, rabbis, shamans, whoever's cell phone that is should know that we know where you live, by the way, and where your children go to school. It gives to those people power in the here and now, the only place where it really counts. If you are His Holiness the Pope and you have arrogated to yourself, for example, the power to bind and to loose and to decide who may read what and how many tithes must be paid, how many holy days must be observed, how many disciplines must be followed, are you seeking power in the hereafter, or are you seeking it now? It seems to me very obvious, that an inescapable conclusion, that it's temporal power that's being talked about. And of a very dictatorial kind, I might add, an absolutist kind, a kind that is not open to the ordinary challenges. The divine right of kings was something you had to challenge not just at the risk of your life, which might end quickly, though the end itself would be slow and painful, the end would be final, but you were told you risked your immortal soul and the rest of your life too. That's quite a powerful instrument of secular discipline. And everyone can name their favorite example, I think, of how and where that kind of tyranny over the minds as well as the bodies of men was exerted. We think of it as belonging to our prehistory, but we only have to look as far as today's Iran, for example, to see a classic theocracy, a country from which I've recently returned, where I wondered how to convey sometimes the flavor of what theocracy really is like. Well, if you're a woman who gets in trouble with the regime and has committed a capital offense in Iran, but you're underage, you're a virgin, you may not be sentenced to death under the law of Iran, because the law forbids the execution of virgins. But you may be raped by the Revolutionary Guards so that you're no longer a virgin in the prison and then executed. I think that sort of conveys what people feel they're allowed to do when they think they have God on their side. And I could tell you far worse than that about what the arrogance of power is when it thinks it's backed by the divine.
A long time ago, again, Aristotle said the possibility of good lives for people does involve an element of luck, where you were born, when you were born, in what circumstances, whether your family has wealth, whether you can have an education. And it behooves us all, I think, as being sensitive to the plight of our fellow human beings around the world, that we should strive to ensure that they do have the chance to think in these terms about what would make a good life rather than mere survival. Of course, one of the things that we would have to do is to reduce the oppressive effect of religions on them.
The best way to address the compatibility of science and religion is in the person of Francis Collins. I don't know if you know him. He ran the Human Genome Project for the U.S. He's a medical geneticist, obviously a scientist with a great career in science, and he's also an evangelical Christian. And he's written a book entitled The Language of God, where he claims to square his evangelical Christianity with the last 50 years of molecular biology and argue successfully that God exists. We know this based on scientific principles, and Jesus is his son. Now, I can't say that he's not a scientist, but what I can say is that the place in his book where he tells you when his doubts were truly removed, his conversion experience, testifies to the way the human mind can be partitioned, where a scientist can lapse in the most egregious way in terms of his scientific standards. And because the passage goes like this: I was hiking in the Cascade Mountains and came upon a beautiful frozen waterfall.
And my doubts were removed, and I fell to my knees in the dewy grass and surrendered myself to Christ. It's virtually verbatim. So now I would suggest to you that it should be obvious to all of you, and it certainly should have been obvious to Francis Collins, that if a frozen waterfall can testify to the divinity of Jesus, anything can mean anything. He said he actually elaborated on this point in an interview for Time magazine. He said the waterfall was frozen in 3 streams, and this put him in the mind of the Trinity. Okay, this is psychotic thinking. In any other context,
do not see science and religion as occupying 2 different compartments that can live side by side. They are in conflict with one another.
Insofar as religion attempts to talk about reality and has an alternative vision of reality, I think they are incompatible, yes.
And this was something which seemed tremendously important to people in the early part of our modern era, in the 16th and 17th centuries. For example, Descartes was particularly anxious to try to persuade the church of which he was a loyal, lifelong member, the Catholic Church, that they could allow science to go on uninterrupted, that they needn't feel anxious about it, because science was addressing itself to phenomena that wasn't really the concern of the religious authorities, that their concern was much more a moral and a spiritual one. And this was a matter that pressed for people at Descartes' time, because Descartes himself, Galileo, Giordano Bruno, various other people were under pressure from the church not to say things about the nature of material reality that conflicted with Scripture. Famously, the pressure point was the adoption or agreement with the Copernican view, the Copernican heliocentric view of the universe, or not. In the year 1600, Giordano Bruno was burnt to death in the Campo dei Fiori in Rome because, among other things, he accepted the Copernican view. Cardinal Bellarmine famously wrote to a cleric who had sent him a letter arguing that Scripture was consistent with Copernicus, saying to this errant cleric that all he had to do was to read Psalm 102, which says that the Lord hath laid the foundations of the earth, that it may not be moved forever, and also citing all the fathers and all the theologians who said that the earth doesn't move and stays at the center of the universe, and that in his prudence, said Cardinal Bellarmine, he should accept this view of the heavens. Then, of course, Galileo himself had to acknowledge that the earth had never moved for him, which was a rather sad reflection. And even though, of course, on his way out of the Inquisition chamber, he did mutter to somebody, "Epo si muove," but it does move for all that. And he spent the rest of his life under house arrest because of it. At that time, the church itself took the view that religion was a direct competitor with science for the truth. It was a direct competitor with science for an understanding of the physical universe and how it worked. Of course, since then, it's given up that view, and just very recently, less than 20 years ago, Rome announced that it had been wrong about Galileo, so it's okay to accept the Copernican view. So now we think that the Church may itself have at long last agreed with Descartes and with Stephen Jay Gould that these are non-overlapping magisteria, that science and religion have quite different spheres of interest, and that in that sense they complement one another, because where science has a great deal to say, there is nothing of moment for the spiritual and moral in our lives, and where religion has a great deal to say, there is an acceptance that the deity might have created a universe which runs according to natural law, runs according, as Descartes wanted to put it, according to mechanical principles like a clock which had been wound up and let going, and that the two therefore could be investigated and discussed separately. But the truth is, of course, that the great religions all have views about the origin and nature of the universe and its destiny, which at a number of points do impinge on the scientific worldview, and where therefore there is a direct competition over the truth, which of the two general outlooks has the right way of thinking about things. And it's important to come back to that, because it suggests something uncomfortable for people who do have a religious outlook, namely that if ever they're able to state something about their religious view which is not obscure or equivocal or ambiguous or wrapped in mystery, if they could ever say anything clear and direct about what they think about the world, that it could, in principle, be testable by science. But as you know, there is an escape clause in almost all religions, which is that God will not be tested. So you can't conduct scientific investigations to test religious claims. I remember once being asked by somebody who went like this, and started and said, "What's this?" And the answer was, "It's God moving in a mysterious way." And this is what the theologians will say if you ask them if there is something that could be directly challenged or tested by a scientific investigation. However, there is another difficulty which is illustrated by the work of the Templeton Foundation. I don't know whether you've ever heard of this extremely rich foundation which gives a prize every year, the Templeton Prize, worth more than the Nobel Prize, to anybody, and this includes, and especially, they especially like scientists and philosophers who will do this, who will make noises friendly to religion. And they fund quite a lot of scientific research. They also give a great deal of money to theology and to apologetical work and to religious publications. And I thought I might just bring along with me some examples of the things that they fund, so that you would see that the question of the relation between science and religion still somewhat presses in our contemporary world, and one reason why, therefore, this metaphysical debate needs to be continued. And it goes like this, and it's just some examples of a program they have, which is called Science in Dialogue, meaning in dialogue with religion. Science in Dialogue. And it says here, the Foundation, Templeton Foundation, has a strong interest in projects that bring one or more scientific disciplines into a mutually enriching discussion with theology and or philosophy, whether for a scholarly audience or the public at large. So one this is a list of their featured grants, the ones that they're rather pleased with. The evolution and theology of cooperation, the emergence of altruistic behavior, forgiveness, and unselfish love. And another one is research fellowship in religion, spirituality, and health. Another one is science and religion in Islam. And another one is Darwin and religion. And the sorts of people who are given these grants are, in the case of the evolution and theology of cooperation, a person who is the head of the evolutionary dynamics program at Harvard Divinity School, and in the case of spirituality, theology, and health, a group of people who work in the sociology department at Duke University and at the Interdisciplinary University of Paris. So these are serious institutions which are getting this money, and you notice when you look at the titles of the grants that there is an embranglement, to use a wonderful term coined by Bishop Berkeley, between science and religion, trying to implicate or insert into one sphere of activity, the scientific, the religious, and vice versa. And the main reason for this, of course, is to retain a sense of respectability for religion by association with science. Right? Scientific endeavor, the giving of grants to what look like major research projects, but they are joint interdisciplinary research projects, and so this maintains an aura of respectability for religion.
How do you talk about being an atheist with your family or some family members who may not be atheists, who may be religious?
So how do you talk about religion with your family members? I like to keep two things in my head when I'm talking with people who I know are friendly. I like to remind myself that people who are believers are not stupid. I think there's often a tendency, especially this tends to happen more online, I think, with atheists, where the conversation can degenerate very quickly into, well, you're just stupid for believing that. And I think that's very, very counterproductive.
Right.
And the other thing I think is good to keep in mind is that these are just bad ideas that these people believe. You know, they can change their mind like that, and like Dan did, and all of a sudden, you know, they're no longer a believer. And you didn't gain 20 points overnight 20 IQ points overnight when you became a non-believer, did you? You just changed your mind.
30 or 40.
30 or 40, okay.
Yeah, yeah, it took a while, but yeah, you're right. I think there are some stupid believers. I mean,
yes.
obviously.
Yes.
Well, there's probably some stupid atheists. I don't know any, but I'm sure there must be.
And it's still good to remind yourself that it doesn't help in the conversation to think of them in that way. Though.
Yeah, because nobody wants to be ridiculed and put down. No one wants to be baby talked down to. You're so such stupid. You want to be respected. If you're going to have any dialogue at all with somebody, it should be a horizontal, respectful dialogue. And if they shut the door on you, well, then that's their problem. But we can keep it open.
We often talk about the harms of religion in society, but I think most of us have talked about this for so long in a general sense that the Overton window has shifted somehow in favor of religious people. If you take a seat and evaluate just how ridiculous religious people have been getting around the world, you'll actually be left dumbfounded, man. I mean, as an example, today in America, you have a whole portion of citizens who think they should be allowed to infringe on others' women's liberties and personal rights simply because of what has been instructed in their fantasy books, man. I'll give you a great example, and I hope you don't mind me talking about this on this video. Let's take the right to either keep or abort pregnancy as an example. The religious right has been talking about this for so long that it seems we've forgotten just how ridiculous they sound and how ridiculous their standards are. These guys actually want a total ban on abortion placed even in cases of rape and incest, even though science has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that probabilities aren't kicking until the 20th to the 28th week, man. And of course, that's a moot point to these people, man. They've rarely if ever cared about science, if anything else. I mean, these are the same guys who wanted to put their parents and surrounding elders' lives in danger several years ago simply because they did not trust the science in the midst of a pandemic, man. So they do not surprise me on that end in the slightest, man. What bothers me even more, however, is that these guys do not base their sense of morality in anything other than the Bible. They might claim that it's because they care about life and consider every stage after conception to be a life, but we all know that's a bunch of bullcrap, man. Because as I've mentioned several times on this channel already, the religious right has repeatedly freaked out when gun reforms on a single type of gun, man, has been mentioned, man. And that's even though it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt again that even the most common sense armed laws will save the lives of thousands upon thousands of kids' lives and adults as well, man. But in each of these cases, it's liberty over life because their fantasy novel doesn't state otherwise, man. And you know, we've all known that for a while. Cognitive dissonance isn't a thing among our religious brethren, which to be honest still amazes me to this point. But still, man, just how this same group of people that believes in their personal freedom to do something that is the First Amendment so much that they're comfortable to overlook the disturbing effects that it's had on the lives of children they've always preached to care about. The fact they've been able to overlook that, but when it comes to women and the rights to decide what happens within their own bodies, all of a sudden they care about these lives, man, that even aren't lives yet. But they do not give a flying fuck, man, about the live kids. Man. Anyway, that's just one of the many arguments that have been made, but it seems none of it matters really, because not only are we still talking about this in the current election going on in the United States, you have states where residents are expected to vote whether or not a total ban on abortion should be allowed. What's in the toilet, man? And hey, the irony isn't lost on me that the situation is even worse in my own home continent, where more often than not the arguments you hear in parliament buildings defending these kinds of stupid and backward rules limiting women's rights are even more stupid. And yeah, I said it, man, any African in the building can come forth and prove otherwise. Not a while back, actually, we had a female politician in my country, Kenya, talking about this issue in parliament, not only saying that it's against African culture, but that rights are part and parcel of the Western culture propaganda designed to weaken the African culture and societies. And not surprising, this is the same argument that they'll use to defend other issues they're uncomfortable with, including same-sex marriage, for example, etc. And every time I've heard Africans and African leaders use this argument, two things have always popped in my mind. One, I'm not discounting the presence and sheer intensity of Western propaganda in Africa, man. Anyone who denies that can come and check out our prime plot I have for sale just 2 miles off the African coast. So that's one. But true, man, if your best argument as for why you think you should retain the right to infringe on a whole gender's right to choose a certain thing is that, 1, it's against your culture, and 2, another group of people just wants us to do this as a psyop. If those are your best arguments for the situation, man, then brother or sister, your society doesn't need a propaganda machine to face its destruction or descent into backwardness, man. Anyway, the reason it's more disturbing, even more disturbing to me, that is currently unfolding in America as well, is that you guys have just come so far, man. And now it's like the age of social networks has regressed a certain portion of your society where only the most branded opinions and arguments are adopted far and wide. So yeah, man, as we talk about the harms that religion has had on humanity throughout history, such as wars, slavery, etc., we should all still remember that it's also still responsible for some of the most backward issues that humanity still has to contend with today. And of course, as another example outside of Africa and America, we all saw just how dangerous religious dogma can be if it infiltrates a government institution in Iran. In Iran, not long ago, we all saw the government form an entire police force that will persecute those who did not live up to their ideals laid out in their fantasy novel. You all remember that, guys, right? They were called the Ram Police. These guys, man, were taking the lives of young girls and imprisoning others simply because they did not wear their hijab right or did a TikTok dance that wasn't deemed holy, man. Are you kidding me, man? And don't let anyone lie to you, man. The Middle East and North African region is riddled with hundreds of these ridiculous laws, all of which have been extracted from, you guessed it, they are fantasy novel, man. I actually pointed out some of them and some of the most ridiculous in the first video that I ever created for this channel. Feel free to go and check it out. And actually, you know what always gets me as well, man, because it's so funny. You know, Muslims in Christian nations recognize the unfairness, dangers, and logical inconsistencies of Christian fundamentalism. And in turn, Christians also recognize just how dangerous fundamentalist Islamism can be. But weirdly enough, for some unfathomable reason, the two groups seem utterly unable to recognize the ridiculousness within their own doctrines for some reason, man. And that's even though, to us outsiders, the two are identical scripts just written in different fonts, man. So yeah, it's unfortunate that we still have to make 20 different parts of the same kind of video, as it means that there is just that much amount of content out there debunking this stuff, man. But the issue still persists into the 21st century. And by the way, I have around 19 hours of content still left to go through, so you can potentially expect part 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11 moving into the future. And each one of these will be around an hour long as well, and I encourage you to stick through as many as you can, because they'll all be distinct videos featuring distinct arguments, basically a new thing every single time that I upload a video. My goal is to make sure that you learn something new every single time. So yeah, guys, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed the content as much as I did creating it, and that you've also smashed the like button, left a comment so YouTube can push the video to even more like-minded people, or just people who need to hear these arguments. Thank you, man. Otherwise, stay safe, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace, man.